Welcome to the Ghost Furnace Podcast. If you have a paranormal experience of your own that you would like to share, please email it to us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com. If you enjoy the show, please rate, subscribe, and review on whichever platform you use. Also, like and share us on Instagram and Facebook. The hosts of the Ghost Furnace Podcast are Nick Pennsylvania, Bond, sometimes referred to as Brendan, and Mike. Thank you and enjoy the show.
As I say, this is going to be fun because I only kind of remember the story and remember nothing about what I said about it. So
this would have been about 3 months ago.
Yeah, so I may have a completely different take on it than what I did the first time. We'll see.
So yeah, just a very quick recap. We once got together again towards the end of winter before the first episode came out, obviously, and we just were testing the water to see how things would go, to see how the flow would be, to see if it would be interesting to listen to. And apparently we are in nearly a dozen episodes now, so it must have worked, but we kind of shelved that first one for a variety of reasons. Mike, this is your personal story. I'm gonna quiet myself right down and let you tell us again.
All right, so it kind of deals with my workplace, so I kind of have to be vague about, the descriptions of some of the machines. But for what we need to know for this story, I was trying to get a phone call. The way the machine operates, all the mix comes in, gets made into slabs. When the slabs are finished, they get pushed onto basically like a cart. We call them cars, but it's basically a cart. And they get those carts get moved off to the next area of the plant. Back in the 70s, there was a man who got smashed between two of the carts, and he was killed. He was basically pancaked in there, and he died. I've had a few small experiences there. The last time I had an experience is probably the biggest one, and it was more or less a odd chain of events. The first time I was walking down the aisleway to my right, I want to say it was almost in my peripherals. Like I see a person like step out and then step back, and to the point where I actually walked and tried to look around the corner to see where they went, because it was just like bizarre to me. But then afterwards I just kind of questioned, did I actually see this person, or is that just like in my mind's eye?
One, like, geez, what a awful way to die. Anyone, dying at work, tragic, but like, man, that's
right.
Like, as far as violent deaths go, like, that's like, you got to think, like, if there is anything to the idea of energy imprinting itself in any way, shape, or form, you kind of have to think that a death like that has to leave something. So, I mean, just the idea that the place has, a weird vibe, or you're seeing things just right off the bat is, understandable, I think, given how we understand how these kind of things work, or think they may work. And just to be clear, Mike, you knew about this story before you saw like the movement and stuff like that, correct?
Yeah, I certainly did. But I wouldn't say that it was like something, when you spend enough time in that area, it's not like you're thinking about it all the time.
Yeah,
I have more mostly normal experiences there, so it's not like it's always, I worked there for 10 years, so it's not like I'm always waiting for something to jump out at me.
Yeah, it kind of becomes normalized as part of like the backstory and part of the environment, but it's not something you're constantly thinking about. But it would be in the back of your head a little bit there. But yeah, I mean, when you see stuff like that, I don't know, like I feel that, as we've talked about, whoa, there's a big explosion outside.
Like firework explosion?
It did not sound like a firework. It sounded like,
maybe we should pause and you should check.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check real quick,
because that could have been someone's propane or something. Well, this is an interesting wrinkle in our regularly scheduled program.
So everything's fine outside. Actually, I don't want to even mention it anymore because whenever we get through all this tonight, I'm going to tell you guys a story that may involve this and for this podcast, and
Oh, cool.
you guys might actually enjoy it. So,
Oh, I think I've heard this parts of this before.
You've probably heard parts of this.
Can we shift gears and go straight to that? Because I'm really curious what this is all about right now.
It's up to you, Brennan.
Do you mind, Mike? Yeah. Okay.
That's
so,
up to you.
okay. So, I'm not sure how you're going to cut this, obviously, Mike.
Well,
but
you know what? Let me give a segue.
Yeah. Okay. Well, segue.
Okay. Here's a quick segue. So while we were in the middle of actually listening to Mike tell his story, there was a sudden explosion outside of Brendan's house. And so we had to pause so Brendan could inspect as to what that was. And when he returned, he didn't look particularly shaken, but he was reminded of something that he needed to tell us, but wasn't going to tell us right away. How dare he? Brendan, what's this all about?
So, okay. So I'm going to, this is weird because it's one of those like, it could be, okay. I'm just gonna say what's up and then we can discuss how weird it is later. Okay. So this is now the fourth time. There has been what sounded like large explosion that like shakes the windows of our house, basically. Other times, sometimes it has been, the first two times it was very much centered on the house itself. The second two times it has sounded like it's come from further away. The first time I'm sitting in my chair out by the window like I do, just reading. This is maybe January COVID, so like January 2020. It sounds like someone drops a car onto our house. I jump up, look around, everything's fine. My brother comes out of his room where he was at and is like, what was that? My parents come up from downstairs and we're seeing like what fell, what happened, couldn't find anything. I did mention this happening to a few of my friends via text, just for like a conversation. Then a few months later, this is after COVID has started and everything. At this point, it happens again. Very, very large, like boom, that sounds like someone literally drops a car onto the house. I'm confused, can't find anything that's happened. My parents, when I go ask them, they heard it, but they said they didn't remember this happening previously a few months earlier, which I thought was strange. And my parents may be listening to this right now, and we did talk about this, even if you guys don't remember. Then it happens again, and that was probably in maybe September or October of last year, and then it just happened again right now. Now, the thing that's strange about that, all four of these have come within a few days of me having a very intense deja vu experience. No idea if they're related, if that's related at all, but that's the only kind of like weird correlation I can draw. The first two times I called it out, especially when talking to some of my friends. If the one is listening, you know, that I talked to this about on a few occasions, she probably remembers us having the same conversation. Basically, what I was trying to figure out was if there was any correlation to these deja vu experiences. It brings up the idea of kind of like manifesting phenomena in high strangeness. Like, is this me causing these things?
I think about whenever I get a Charlie horse, like I know like 2 seconds before that I'm going to. I know that's not the best illusion, but like that's the closest thing I can think of.
Yeah, and not so much am I causing these, but am I having a weird reaction to something before it actually happens? Like it's kind of that retro, not retro causality, but kind of like premonitory, I guess.
Maybe like how they say animals will act strangely prior to earthquakes and whatnot.
Yeah, like I have no idea what this mechanism is or even if these things are connected, but it's something that has weirded me out every time. And you guys saw, like, I mean, no one else can tell that we're on video chat. You guys saw how like I looked at the window and looked very concerned very quickly. That's because every time this happens, it freaks me out because I hear the boom, and now I'm correlating that to like, wait, when was the last time I had deja vu really bad? That was 3 days ago, which I don't get that often. I'm sure I get it as much as any normal person does, but what do you guys think?
Well,
Yeah.
the first thing I would say is that, we live in an area where mining is still very common. There's
Yes.
still a lot of, like, I know I'll drive by neighborhoods and there are blasting signs. We've all seen this, Mike. I know you used to live in an area just a few years ago that has a lot of blasting. But for, again, people who are listening to this aren't aware, it's 9:45 at night. They are not blasting right now, and I don't know of any operations that are that close to your house.
Yeah, like there is a gas well, maybe 5 or 6 miles to the west of us.
But where we're at too, a gas pad 5 or 6 miles, like there's a gas
everywhere.
pad 5 or 6 miles from everywhere. Exactly.
Yeah. So like, and it would be different if these happened more regularly.
I don't think they blasted gas wells either.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's like air explosions of
That
like the
seems like
burn
a
off
bad
of
idea.
like, well, I'm wondering if it's like, how they have, and maybe someone who is a shale gas well expert can tell us, like,
This would be a question for my dad for sure.
Your father would probably know, like, because they have those like blow off pipes that are usually burning and everything. Like, do those cause explosions sometimes, like in the air?
I mean, it's a pressure thing, so the only thing I can think would be if there was a sudden influx of gas, but I think those are regulated.
You would have,
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's one of those things. Like I completely agree with you, Nick. The Occam's razor answer is that it's gas wells or mining or something like that, because I've even heard people around here that have like obviously set off like very large fireworks or shot blocks of tannerite or things like that, and it sounds very different than these things. So
there was a very big house fire next door to you not crazy long ago either. I wonder if that corresponded with one. I don't know,
because it was while I was
what a
talking.
Weird thing.
Yeah, it's just weird. Yeah, it's one of those things. I'm not saying it's even paranormal. It's just weird. Like I just don't know.
it is weird that this has happened enough that you have had conversation, because I think you briefly mentioned this once before to me, and that you're finding, of course, when something happens, we try to find patterns in everything. We're pattern seeking, or what like Dr. Michael Shermer calls patternicity, pattern seeking behavior.
Yep.
So I am curious about this deja vu thing, because how often would you say you have that feeling as it is? Because I know myself, there's a lot of times I'll go through a day and I'll feel like I dreamt about this. But is that just me being in a weird mood?
Correct. Every once in a while I'll have the feel like, oh, like I've been here before, and like, you haven't, or seen something and it's taking you back to a different time or whatever. And you're like, oh, it feels kind of weird. But these deja vu experiences I've had, you get almost like this sudden, intense feeling of in the momentness, as Heidegger would say, almost, where you kind of stop for a second, everything kind of gets a little bit quiet, and you're like, this has happened before. And it almost feels like you're in like a waking dream, and like you're clearly awake. Because like I know, like with like deja vu, they've said that basically what happens is, how your brain's always taking in tons of input and sorting it. And what I heard on an NPR thing one night years ago was basically someone explained deja vu, that like what happens is your brain is always sorting information into like new and old before it even sorts it into like relevancy. And your brain's doing that constantly. And sometimes it takes like a new packet of information, to use like computer terms. And instead of it being non-relevant, it says not only is this relevant information, but it is new information. It correlates it immediately to a piece of old information, and kind of gets like stuck in like a kind of like an if-then loop almost for coding. And that's where that feeling comes from, is when you see like a house that you've never seen before, but you're like, oh no, I've definitely been here before. It's like, no, it's just your brain not sorting stuff properly. And it's just a very intense feeling of like that almost. But I mean, it doesn't happen a ton, maybe a few times a year, maybe there is a neurologist out there who can explain it better than I can. But again, you were saying about patterns, Nick. That's the only, and because that happened the first time, so close to the first one, and it happened within a short period with the second one, then this third time and the fourth time, it very well just be me looking for patterns now and drawing those correlations when there is no correlation, not causation. Again, it's just something weird, and it's odd that happened again. 2 or 3 days after I had some serious deja vu, and we're having a paranormal podcast, and one goes off outside. So it's just weird. It's just weird. Straight up, just weird.
Also, one that we were looking for additional content.
Yeah, that's true. That was spontaneous content, which I do want to get back to your story, Mike.
We will.
We will.
to not be to hijack that with me being like, oh, there's some sounds outside, and my brain's kind of weird. Ugh.
All right, so we're coming back. That was weird. And for just a quick thing, I mean, Brendan is a hunter. It is very late at night. There are no fireworks. The whole thing's very weird. There are no cars backfiring. We are trying to debunk this, but boy, what strange things that happen in the moment. So let's return now to where we were before, with Mike talking about his job at a factory. And strange things are happening. So Mike's going to relate to us a series of very strange events that occurred to him at work.
Okay, thanks, Nick. This is a different occurrence. This one would have been during the daytime. Basically, one part of the machine was broken, and we had like 3 or 4 guys there, and we were all standing around it trying to figure out what was wrong with it. If you're standing with a group of people and you kind of have it in your head who's where, you just kind of like can feel the people around you, and who's where. Well, this particular time, I don't know if it's so much paranormal, but it really caught me off guard because I really thought somebody was standing right next to me, and like it was just kind of categorized in my head that there was someone to the right of me until I realized that there was nobody next to me. I mean, that was it. I mean, it was just a weird thing.
That's just such like an unnerving thing to happen.
Right.
Because like, you're right. You can tell when there's people standing next to you, and I'm not sure what part of our like evolutionary system and development like led to that. I don't know don't know the mechanism, but I think we've all been there whenever you're standing somewhere and you just kind of know there's people around, and you kind of have this like almost like situational awareness of just where things are at. It's part of what we were talking about earlier, where your brain's doing things the whole time, working on, just environmental awareness, I guess. Part of me is like, well, you know what? Every system we have has hiccups. Maybe that's all it was just like just a little kind of glitch in everything. But when you add in the fact that like you have a history of just weird, small weird, but weird things happening in this place, it goes from being just a hiccup, I think, to a possible experience or possible piece of the story. That's kind of my initial reaction. I have a few like overarching things I want to talk about regarding this stuff, but I'll wait till after we have all the stories out.
That was a weird thing, and like it was probably the only time in my life I can remember it ever actually like jarring me, where I was like, wait a second, there's nobody standing here. But on to the next one, the one that Nick's excited about. So I guess the first thing that happened, I was working in the evening, so it was it was late. But I mean, keep in mind, I'd already been working at this job for 9 years. Granted, not in this workstation every time, but I've spent a lot of time here, and out of the 9 years, I've only had 3. Well, this would be the 3rd event. So it's not like this is always on my mind. I was walking away from the area where the guy had passed away. I was actually listening to a paranormal podcast, and I had it for some reason. The thought passed in my head. That guy who died, he's not here anymore. He's moved on. I mean, that's all it was in my head. He's not here. There's no reason for him to hang around here. He's moved on. Like actually, the moment I said that, I looked up. The machine that we were working on, where I thought that the guy was standing next to me, that same exact area, a gate swung open right in front of me. Like it was like as soon as that thought ended, and this is something that I've never seen before. Okay, for one, I've never seen that gate swing open before. there are gates there that are, vibrations cause them. And this is a machine that vibrates a lot. So it's possible it wasn't latched correctly, but just the timing of it is what was weird to me. It was enough to make me kind of laugh, like, oh my goodness, that was crazy. So I closed the gate up, made sure it was latched properly, which I think it would have been, there's really no reason it would have been unlatched, but like I said, it's likely that if it wasn't latched correctly, it could have come open. Okay, so I kind of walked away from that laughing. My next thought was, well, maybe maybe he still is here, right? Maybe I was just trying to fool myself. So then I started having issues with my machine, which isn't uncommon. It starts jamming up here, jamming up there. Well, so it jams up in the area where he was actually killed at, where the carts come through and get loaded. So I go down, and it was a really bad jam up. It was a real pain to get straightened out. I have to use a bar, and I'm banging on stuff, and I finally get things all straightened out again. On this piece of equipment, it counts how many slabs go through the machine. So I go and look at the count, and it was 911. So another weird kind of coincidence that made me think. It just made me think a little bit. It wasn't like, oh, this is a paranormal event I'm dealing with right now. It just something to make me think. And so I go through that. I actually started to get kind of mad, and I was like, look, I'm just trying to work here. So I got the machine running again. It kept jamming up on me. I finally got everything going. That's not uncommon. You have nights where things are just jamming up a lot. So I get running fine. Everything's going well. Again, I take my break. No radios on or anything. Break for me is probably like a 5-minute walk to the break room. And keep in mind at this point, there's only 3 other guys in the plant at night. One's in maintenance, which is in a completely different building. And the maintenance guy who was there, he's not one to really come out of the building unless you call him. There's a guy at the other end of the kiln, and they're pretty busy down there themselves, so he's not coming up and turning stuff on. And then the foreman, which, they were not coming around for no reason either. So I go on my break, I come back, and there's a radio playing real loud right next to where all this stuff that was sitting on kind of off to the side where all this stuff was happening at. And I go over and look at the radio, and I'm trying to figure out if maybe there's a timer on it or something that would have caused it to turn on. But this is not a radio that has any type of sophistication. Like, it's basically you turn it on or you turn it off. It's an old, CD player. So that actually freaked me out a little bit. I was a little bit like, why is this radio on, And then on top of that, the song that was playing was running on empty. And if you remember, whenever I described the machine that I operate, it's gravity fed through a bin. So that's just a piece of information there to think about for a second. I turn the radio off. I go back and I start the machine up again. And within about 5 minutes, I realized, oh no, my bin went empty. Like, I was having a mechanical problem, and actually I was running on empty. And that's basically how it all ended.
Those are some wild stories. And I have a whole lot of thoughts. And again, I like how you're looking at it as like, each one of these things on their own may not be anything too spectacular, but you take the sum of the parts, and think, okay, well, if all these things are happening individually, maybe there's something to it. Just to kind of recap a few of those with the gate and everything. Like you said, these machines, vibrate and everything. So you would think that would be taken into account when building the gate and the latch,
Oh,
so it's supposedly, like, even if it was latched, the idea of it shaking loose, is probably pretty rare. Like you said, you've never seen that happen before anyway.
Like I said, there are certain ones in the plant that often don't latch well, but this one in particular, it's not one that you open very often.
So low wear and tear. It's not like
So it's not something you see open. So I've never seen this pop open for no reason.
Yeah, so that's just kind of like, yeah, it's just kind of weird. But again, you throw that in with the timing and everything of what you were thinking, and it's like, you know,
Right.
same with the, like you said, the 911 count. You know, is it possible that someone at that time, whenever this person unfortunately had this accident, you know, someone probably yelled, "Call 911." You know,
Yeah. Right.
so maybe that numerical value is, you know, somehow stuck in the same ether.
I'm gonna say no on that one real quick.
Go for it.
Not because you're wrong, Brendan, but because I need to verify when 911 came to be.
Good point.
That's a good
point.
Because
good
if this was back in the 70s, 911 I don't believe existed. The first, okay, so 911 has existed since 1968, but in the 1970s, AT&T and other departments came together to make the emergency 911 call number more sophisticated. So they may have been.
So it could have been,
could have been.
Yeah.
Could have been.
But it's
so,
a good,
like I said, Brendan, it's not that you're wrong. It's just I wanted to verify that because I know it's not as modern as everybody thinks it may be.
No, that's an excellent point. Excellent point. But yes, and we all know that just when you're looking at paranormal stuff in general, any numerology comes up all the time. Numbers just seem to show up a lot when it comes to these kind of things. Who knows why, but they do. With the radio, I'm glad that you explained what kind of radio it was, Mike, because I believe, the same model shortwave radio that you have, Nick. And if I had $1 for the number of same one, the Sunco, yeah. If I had $1 for how many times I've accidentally set the alarm on that thing, and then it's gone off at weird hours, I'd have like between $7 and $10, which is a lot, I think, for alarms being accidentally set. So yeah, so like the idea of someone setting an alarm on the radio earlier in the day, getting the AM and PM wrong, and then it randomly going off in the middle of the night where you're there, that seems like a plausible explanation. Like you said,
well, that was the first thing I thought, and I went and I looked. I did not see anything that said alarm set, any type of
So it probably just didn't have an alarm because that's not the most common thing. So yeah, I mean, I think you put like that together with everything else that you kind of mentioned, you know, big and small, and I think that brings up three things that I kind of want to get your guys' thoughts on. The more grounded in electrical pun intended, part would be EMF. So you're running a whole bunch of heavy machinery in this place. EMF comes up all the time as far as being able, whether people are saying EMF fields are inducing paranormal events or if they are tricking our brains into paranormal events. You kind of hear it used, explained both ways. But would you say this is a place that would, in theory, have both A, high, and B, possibly fluctuating magnetic fields, Mike?
I would have to imagine. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah. So again, like I'm not someone who comes down on the camp either way with EMF. Whether again, we've talked. Some people think that spirits somehow use electromagnetism to manifest certain things in certain ways, and there's other people who think that EMF causes us to basically hallucinate or imagine these events. And I believe there actually has been scientific studies around both of those, and both of them seem to have at least some credibility to them from a scientific standpoint. So that's one thing I kind of wanted to bring up. And then the other two, I thought it was interesting that twice you communicated with this spirit, once mentally and then once verbally. And both kind of prompted, you know, external responses almost. And I just think that's interesting because we often talk about not understanding the mechanism of these things. And it's interesting to me to think that spirits can both A, communicate with us, you know, they understand words, and two, that sometimes they can also telepathically understand our thoughts. because you hear, because again, your stories are not unique in that sense. You hear that all the time from people, whether it's them setting boundaries with spirits, whether like almost like you did, where saying like, hey, I'm just trying to work here,
Mhm.
um, or you internally doubting that that guy was still around for one reason or another,
Right.
And again, I'm not saying either one of those makes your stories more or less credible. I just think there are interesting elements to it that we see come up often in similar stories.
Well, and going off of that, Brendan, a little bit, I mean, we've already talked about the fear cages, and I don't know much in way of studies that have been done about that, but I do know it's something that's discussed when there is you know, a lot of wires coming together without the benefit of being properly junctioned and things like that. It can create these areas which can kind of play with our minds. We do know about ultrasonic frequencies. We've talked about a specific example in which a government building's HVAC system, the ventilation was creating a frequency that is known to kind of play tricks on us and whatnot. Well, some of the things that I want to bring up, I know if I were in this situation, I would be looking at, well, it's a weird time. I've been, Mike, what time was it? I know it wasn't really late or really early in your shift, but it was it was overnight, correct?
No, it was evening. It was probably like, it was probably around like 8 or 9 o'clock.
Okay,
So it
never
was
mind
like
then. I
dusk.
For some reason I was thinking it was like the wee hours of the morning. The bottom line is I would be looking at a lot of things, and I would be looking at things because I would have been spooked pretty early on, even though I'm going to try to dismiss things. I'm doing that in order not to scare myself. And these are so many little things that it becomes very difficult to do that because, yes, these could be just a parade of coincidences. But as the parade goes on, it becomes increasingly difficult in the moment to be dismissive of it. It's just too much weirdness all at once. It's just too many things that, like the song coming on, it doesn't take a lot of digging to see the irony in that, nor with the slabometer coming up to 911. I mean, it's not like you're reaching really far to find something weird in that. And yes, it is an arbitrary number that came up. Yes, it is a song that has been, like most Eagles songs, have been played into the ground. But it's just a lot of real weird things. And yeah, in the moment, I probably would have brought somebody else in just because I would have felt uncomfortable. It's like I said before, you know, I have a very hard time believing things, but I'm not going to go sit in my root cellar overnight in the dark either. It's just not, that's nothing good comes of that.
The only time I really was shaken, I would think, was when the radio was on, when I was like, then I stood there thinking like, why is this on? And I went over to inspect it because I was like, that did get me a little bit, but for the most part, I wasn't like running around thinking, oh my, what is this? What is going on here?
Well, yeah, and I think both that and like you said, whenever you thought there was someone staying next to you and there clearly wasn't. The difference, I think,
Well, that was a
so
different time, but yeah, that was.
yeah, it was a different time, yeah. But that is an example. What I'm saying is I think that anytime reality ceases to conform to the version of it we have in our head, it's a natural reaction to have some little bit of adrenaline going because your brain and your body is thinking, okay, something is wrong here. As a survival mechanism, I need to figure out now what is causing it. Is it me? Is it something external? Is there a threat? Stuff like that. And those things tick those boxes very quickly for the little reptile part of our brain that senses those things. So again, you say you weren't like scared as in like, oh, I'm not worried about this ghost trying to haunt me or scare me or whatever, but it's a natural reaction, I think, for your brain to be like, whoa, what is going on here? This isn't fitting with the norm.
Right.
And there's there's a disconnect between what I think should be happening and how things are working and what's actually happening out there. So,
And that's usually when you make that connection too, that like, you know,
oh
something
yeah,
happened here and there's a possibility for a
yes,
paranormal activity.
yeah, because I mean, we're the kind of people that are, again, regardless of what we believe, because this is something that we're interested in, our brains probably jump to those things a little bit quicker than others.
Mhm.
We're, again, regardless of belief level, it's just because it's something we're aware of. We're influenced by what we consume, you know.
Yes.
And that's something that, you know, we're going to jump there first. That's why I think a lot of times when you hear especially outlandish stories from people who like aren't into these kind of things, not so much that they're necessarily more credible witnesses, but they probably had to go through a few more check boxes to get to that before we went in that similar situation. Like Nick, with the gentleman that you interviewed a few weeks back, you know, he probably had to go a whole lot further to get to Thunderbird than like what we would have.
Well,
You
it's
know?
actually years. He actually addressed that, saying that
Oh, you're
he was
right.
just
You're right.
really taken by how what a strange, and obviously he recognized it and categorized it as being a very strange thing. But yeah, in that interview, Brian talks about it wouldn't be until years later when he's hearing documentaries, and he looks for those things too, but with the expansion of cable and everything, that he
Yeah.
looked at and said, I wonder if that's not what I was seeing that day.
Yeah, and that's
It
why
was still with
yeah.
him as being just a fantastical experience.
Exactly. And that's why, again, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the credibility of the witness or the viability of the story, but it's certainly something that has to affect how we interpret these situations, and especially with how our brains and bodies react to them.
You know, the first experience I talked about where I didn't want to say it was an apparition because it was so weird to me. Like, it's kind of led me into this theory that, you know, maybe a lot of times when people are actually seeing apparitions, they're not seeing them in the physical world, but it's more or less in their mind's eye where they're seeing apparitions or whatever you want to call it.
I would absolutely agree. I think that there is a very, like, because you do have occasions, obviously, where multiple people see the same phenomena, but you also have lots of stories where people experience something and see things totally different.
Well, like the Harmony Inn, right?
Exactly, yeah. So like, I think that the idea that what we're seeing when we're talking about these apparitions might very well be internal. That doesn't make them any more or less real, because our interpretation of reality is literally just playing in our own heads. The correlation between what is actually real and what we're seeing and interpreting and putting together as reality are two very, very different things. Psychology, philosophy has proven that. So yeah, I think that's something you have to take into account too, is when you see something like that, does that mean it physically has to be in that particular place in space for it to be a real experience that you're having? I would say it doesn't, because it really has more to do with how you interpret the experience than anything else.
Yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. So,
oh, for sure. I'd have a hard time with that, just for the record.
Which one?
Absolutely.
The totality of it.
Oh yeah, add it up. It's like sitting in a root cellar overnight in the dark. It's not comfortable.
Yeah.
And again, that's interesting how a place, like you said, yes, you're not in that particular place in the building every day, but you've been there for years at the time of this occurrence, and you're still there, and this is an exceptional moment. Even if you're not, and I think that's even more remarkable, because we've talked about there's certain places where you are primed to be uncomfortable. Well, this is a place, yes, you had been aware of some of these stories, you're aware that this thing happened, but people get hurt there, not all the time, but with more regularly than, say, if you were working at the grocery store, right? And the fact that you're not uncomfortable there, except for that night,
Right.
or this other incident. I think that's extremely, when you are made uncomfortable in a place that you are very familiar with.
Well, something else that just occurred to me when you were talking, Nick. I don't know if you would consider this a synchronicity, Brendan, but whenever I first started telling this story tonight, I don't know. You guys probably saw. I looked down because I was getting a phone call. I stopped. I was like, "Oh, I'm getting a phone call." And whenever we took our little break, I actually called back. It was one of the other supervisors, and I'm just thinking now he had a question, and it was about this machine that we're talking about.
Oh, really?
Right.
Wow.
It's weird enough because there's a lot of machines there.
Yeah, I was about to say,
there's a good 10 or so,
Yeah, so like the odds of it being a complete coincidence, yeah. But again, I think the difference between coincidence and synchronicity is when you have a synchronicity, it leads to some sort of either reaction or context that would not be there otherwise. Maybe that's this guy's spirit reaching out, knowing that we're talking about him.
Just letting us know. He's like, you better watch what you're saying there.
Yeah, seriously, because yeah.
Nick looks like he's freaked out by that one.
Well, again,
again, not comfortable.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have answered him.
Yeah, that's not the thing I necessarily want to hear right now. Yeah.
Cool.
Well, we don't want to hear that, but we do want to hear from you. Mike, how can people reach out to us?
Yes, we would love to hear your stories, so please email us at theghostfurnacepodcast@gmail.com.
Or hit us up on Facebook or Instagram.
Instagram, yep.
And for the record, Sarah did text me back. They did not hear that explosion.
Interesting.
Which is weird because she's like maybe 3 miles away. And that sounded like it was louder than 3 miles. I don't know.